Welcome to today's deep dive into one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior and suffering: shame. Over the next hour and 50 minutes, we're going to explore something that affects every single person listening, yet remains one of the most hidden and misunderstood aspects of human psychology. We're going to uncover how shame literally gets wired into your brain before you can form memories, why it's so different from guilt, and most importantly, how understanding its hidden architecture can lead to genuine healing and transformation. Let me start with a story that plays out millions of times every day around the world. Picture a 14-month-old toddler who has just learned to walk. She's exploring her world with unbridled enthusiasm, and she discovers something fascinating. Maybe it's mom's lipstick, maybe it's a dust bunny, maybe it's something from the trash. Her little face lights up with pure joy and excitement as she toddles back to show her mother this amazing discovery. Her eyes are sparkling, her body is vibrating with excitement, and she fully expects her mother to share in this magnificent moment. But instead of the mirroring joy she expects, she sees something else on her mother's face: disgust, disapproval, maybe even anger. In less than 300 milliseconds, faster than conscious thought, something profound happens in that toddler's nervous system. The excitement vanishes. Her shoulders droop. Her head drops. She can't look at her mother anymore. Her whole body seems to deflate like a balloon losing air. This is the birth of shame. And what's happening in that moment isn't just an emotional experience, it's a fundamental rewiring of the brain that will affect how this child experiences herself for the rest of her life. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but we all experience disapproval as children. That's just part of growing up, right? And you're absolutely right. But here's what makes this so profound. These early shame experiences don't just create memories, they create the actual neural architecture that determines how we experience ourselves in relationship to others. They shape the very structure of our brains. Let me explain what I mean by that. When we're born, our brains are remarkably undeveloped compared to other mammals. A newborn horse can walk within hours of birth. A human infant can't even hold their head up. This isn't a design flaw. It's actually what allows us to become such complex social beings. Our brains literally develop in relationship with our caregivers. In those first couple of years of life, the right hemisphere of the brain is dominant. The right brain doesn't deal with language or logic. It processes emotional information, reads faces, understands tone of voice, and manages our connection to others. It develops through thousands and thousands of micro interactions with caregivers. Every time a baby looks at their mother's face and sees delight reflected back, every time they cry and someone soothes them, every time they smile and someone smiles back, these aren't just nice moments. They're literally building the brain. Specifically, they're building something called the orbitofrontal cortex, which is like the CEO of emotional regulation. It's located right behind your eyes, and it's responsible for reading social cues, managing emotions, and maintaining our sense of self in relationship to others. This part of the brain doesn't come pre programmed, it's shaped entirely by our early relationships. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. For the first year or so of life, the relationship between infant and caregiver is mostly about what researchers call attunement and co regulation. The baby smiles, the mother smiles back. The baby cries, the mother soothes. The baby gets excited, the mother shares that excitement. Through these interactions, the baby's nervous system learns to regulate itself. They learn that emotions can be shared, that distress can be soothed, that joy can be amplified through connection. But around 12 to 16 months, something changes. The toddler becomes mobile. They start exploring. And suddenly, for the first time, they encounter something new: their caregiver's disapproval. The same mother who used to delight in everything they did now sometimes shows a different face. And this is actually necessary for socialization. Children need to learn boundaries, safety, social rules. But here's the thing about shame that makes it different from other learning experiences. Shame doesn't just teach us that a behavior is wrong, it teaches us that we are wrong. When that toddler sees disgust on her mother's face, she doesn't just learn, don't play with lipstick. At a deep neurobiological level, she learns, when I follow my curiosity and joy, I become disgusting to the person I need most. And this happens at a pre-linguistic level. The toddler doesn't have words for this experience. She can't think about it or process it cognitively. It just gets encoded in her nervous system as a felt sense, a full body experience of being wrong, bad, unworthy of connection. This is fundamentally different from guilt. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt is about actions, and it can actually be adaptive. It motivates us to make amends, to change our behavior. Shame is about the self, and instead of motivating positive change, it tends to make us want to disappear, to hide, to cease existing in the eyes of others. Think about your own experience for a moment. Remember a time when you felt guilty about something you did. Maybe you said something hurtful to someone you care about, or you forgot an important commitment. How did that feel in your body? You probably felt uncomfortable, maybe anxious, but you could think about ways to fix it. You could apologize, make amends, do better next time. Now remember a time when you felt deeply ashamed. Maybe you were publicly humiliated or someone exposed something about you that you desperately wanted to keep hidden. How did that feel? If you really let yourself remember, you might notice that shame doesn't just feel bad, it feels like annihilation, like you want to disappear, to cease existing. You might have felt it as heat flooding your face, your stomach dropping, your whole body wanting to collapse in on itself. That's because shame activates ancient survival systems in our nervous system. When we experience shame, our sympathetic nervous system, the system that mobilizes us for action, suddenly shuts down. Our parasympathetic nervous system takes over, but not in the restful, peaceful way it does when we're relaxed. This is what researchers call a dorsal vagal shutdown or parasympathetic collapse. Our heart rate drops, blood pressure falls, our muscles lose tone. We literally cannot stand tall or look others in the eye. This response exists in many mammals. If you've ever seen a dog that's been scolded, you've seen this same collapse, tail tucked, head down, body low to the ground. But in humans, because of our complex social nature and our capacity for self awareness, shame becomes something far more elaborate and painful. And here's something crucial to understand. Once these shame patterns get wired into our nervous system in early childhood, they become our default response to certain triggers for the rest of our lives. Someone gives us a certain look, uses a certain tone of voice, and before we can even think about it, we're that collapsed toddler again. But wait, you might be thinking, not everyone who experiences disapproval as a toddler develops toxic shame, and you're absolutely right. This brings us to one of the most important concepts in understanding shame repair. Let's go back to our toddler with the lipstick. She sees disgust on her mother's face and experiences that shame collapse. What happens next is crucial. If the mother notices her daughter's distress, softens, kneels down, and reconnects with warmth. Oh, sweetie, I see you found something interesting. But lipstick isn't for playing with. Let's find something else fun to explore. Something magical happens. The shame state doesn't get locked in. The child learns that even when connection ruptures, it can be repaired. She learns that she can do something wrong without being wrong. This is what researchers call rupture and repair, and it might be the most important process in human development. Through thousands of these cycles, connection, rupture, repair, children learn that relationships can withstand imperfection, that they can make mistakes without losing love, that shame doesn't have to be permanent. But what if repair doesn't come? What if the mother remains disgusted, angry, cold? What if she says, "You're such a bad girl. You always make such a mess. Why can't you be good like your sister?" Now the child's nervous system stays in that shame collapse. And more importantly, the developing orbitofrontal cortex, that CEO of emotional regulation, wires itself around chronic, unrepaired shame states. These children don't develop shame resilience. They develop what we might call shame proneness. Their brains become hypervigilant for any sign of disapproval, any hint that they might be exposed as inadequate or flawed. They don't learn to regulate shame because they never experience its resolution. And here's what's particularly insidious about this. Shame becomes the lens through which they see themselves in the world. It's not just that they feel shame sometimes. Shame becomes the core of their identity. They don't just feel like they've done wrong things, they feel like they are wrong at the deepest level of their being. This is what therapists and researchers call core shame, and it's different from the ordinary shame we all experience from time to time. Core shame is a conviction, usually formed before we have language to describe it, that we are fundamentally flawed, unworthy of love and belonging. It's not about what we've done, it's about who we are. People with core shame often don't even recognize it as shame. It's been there so long, it feels like truth. They might say things like, I've always known there was something wrong with me, or if people really knew me, they'd reject me, or no matter what I achieve, I still feel like a fraud. These aren't passing thoughts. They're deeply held convictions about the nature of reality. And because core shame forms in the right brain before the development of language and logical thinking, it doesn't respond to rational arguments. You can tell someone all day long that they're worthy, that they're loved, that they have nothing to be ashamed of. They might even believe you intellectually, but in their body, in their nervous system, in that right brain that processes emotional reality, they know the truth, that they're fundamentally flawed. This is why affirmations often don't work for people with deep shame. The left brain might be saying, I am worthy of love, but the right brain, which processes emotional experience 200 times faster than the left brain processes words, has already flooded the body with the felt sense of unworthiness. It's like trying to convince yourself the stove isn't hot while your hand is burning. Let me paint a picture of how this plays out in adult life. Sarah is a successful attorney, by all outer measures accomplished and competent. But inside, she lives with constant anxiety that she'll be found out. Every mistake, no matter how small, confirms what she's always known, that she's not as smart as people think. Every success feels hollow because she's convinced it's just luck or that she's fooled people again. In relationships, she either keeps people at a distance or becomes desperately clingy, terrified of abandonment. She can't accept compliments. They literally don't compute. When someone says something nice about her, she immediately thinks of all the ways they're wrong or assumes they're just being polite. She's hypervigilant for any sign of criticism or rejection. A slight change in someone's tone of voice can send her into a spiral of self-hatred that lasts for days. At work, she's a perfectionist, not because she loves excellence, but because she's terrified of being exposed as inadequate. She works twice as hard as her colleagues, never says no to additional responsibilities, and still feels like she's constantly on the verge of being fired. She can't celebrate her achievements because each success just raises the bar for what she has to do to keep hiding her fundamental inadequacy. This is exhausting. Imagine going through life convinced that you're one mistake away from everyone discovering that you're worthless. Imagine the energy it takes to constantly monitor yourself, to perform, to hide. People with core shame often describe feeling like they're wearing a mask all the time, terrified that it might slip and reveal who they really are. And here's the thing. Sarah's shame isn't based on anything real. She's not actually inadequate or unworthy. But remember, shame formed in her nervous system before she could think or reason. It's not a belief she chose. It's a felt reality that got wired into her brain through thousands of interactions in her earliest years. Maybe her parents were overwhelmed and couldn't provide consistent attunement. Maybe they were critical perfectionists who only showed approval for achievement. Maybe there was trauma, abuse, neglect, or maybe, and this is important, they were good enough parents who did their best, but there was a mismatch between her temperament and what they could provide. Some children are born with more sensitive nervous systems and need more co regulation than others. It's not about blame, it's about understanding how these patterns form. The really fascinating thing about shame from a neurobiological perspective is how it involves specific brain regions and neural pathways. The orbitofrontal cortex, which I mentioned earlier, is crucial. This region integrates information from the body, the emotional brain, and the thinking brain. It's what allows us to have a felt sense of ourselves in relationship to others. When shame is triggered, the orbitofrontal cortex essentially sounds an alarm. Social threat detected. You're about to be rejected. This triggers a cascade of neurobiological events. The amygdala, our brain's alarm system, fires. Stress hormones flood our system. The dorsal vagal complex activates, causing that parasympathetic collapse I described earlier. But here's what's really interesting. All of this happens faster than conscious thought. The right brain processes emotional information in about 30 milliseconds. The left brain, which handles language and logic, takes about 500 milliseconds to come online. So by the time you can think about what's happening, your body has already gone into a full shame response. This is why you can't talk yourself out of shame in the moment. By the time your thinking brain comes online, your body is already flooded with the neurochemistry of shame. Your muscles have already collapsed. Your eyes have already averted. Your whole system has already gone into hide mode. And because shame formed before you had words, it doesn't speak in words. It speaks in body sensations, in images, in felt senses. This is why people often struggle to describe shame. They might say, I just feel bad, or I feel like nothing, or I want to disappear. These aren't metaphors. They're attempts to put words to a fundamentally wordless experience. The body sensations of shame are actually quite specific. There's often heat in the face and chest, what we call blushing, though it can happen even when it's not visible. There's a feeling of shrinking or collapsing, like you're getting smaller. There's often nausea or a sinking feeling in the stomach. The shoulders round forward, the head drops, the eyes look down or away. These aren't learned behaviors, they're hardwired responses that happen automatically when shame is triggered. Some researchers have found that the physical posture of shame is remarkably consistent across cultures. Whether you're in New York or New Guinea, shame looks the same: collapsed posture, averted gaze, covered face. This suggests that shame isn't just a social construction, but a fundamental biological response that evolved for specific purposes. From an evolutionary perspective, shame serves important functions. In our ancestral environment, being rejected from the tribe meant death. You couldn't survive alone on the savannah. So we evolved exquisitely sensitive systems for detecting and responding to potential social rejection. Shame, in its adaptive form, motivates us to follow social norms, to repair relationships when we've damaged them, to maintain our standing in the group. The shame display, that collapsed posture, averted gaze, also serves as a social signal. It shows submission, deference, acknowledgement of wrongdoing. In many social species, submission displays prevent further aggression from dominant individuals. The shame display essentially says, I acknowledge I've transgressed. I'm not a threat. Please don't reject me from the group. But here's where modern life creates problems. Our shame systems evolved for small, stable tribes where everyone knew everyone and social norms were clear and consistent. Now we live in massive, anonymous societies with conflicting values and constant evaluation. We're exposed to judgment from strangers on social media. We're compared to impossible standards in advertising. We're expected to perform and achieve in ways that would have been incomprehensible to our ancestors. Our shame systems aren't equipped for this. They can't tell the difference between a critical comment on Facebook and tribal rejection. They can't distinguish between not getting a job and being cast out to die. The nervous system responds to all social threats as if they're matters of life and death because, evolutionarily speaking, they were. This is why shame can feel so overwhelming, so annihilating. Your rational mind might know that one person's disapproval won't kill you, But your nervous system doesn't know that. It's responding with programs that evolved over millions of years to keep you alive in a very different world. Let me tell you about what researchers call the shame rage cycle, because this is something that affects millions of people and relationships. Remember, shame involves a parasympathetic collapse, the nervous system shutting down, going into submission. But for many people, especially those who experience chronic shame in childhood, the nervous system can't tolerate staying in that collapsed state. It's too vulnerable, too painful. So, what happens? The nervous system swings to the opposite extreme. The sympathetic nervous system suddenly fires up, flooding the body with adrenaline and cortisol. The person goes from collapsed shame to explosive rage in seconds. This isn't a conscious choice, it's an automatic defensive response. The rage feels powerful, it feels protective, it pushes away the unbearable vulnerability of shame. But here's the problem: rage behaviors often lead to more shame. The person says things they don't mean, damages relationships, confirms their belief that they're bad. So they collapse back into shame, which becomes unbearable, which triggers more rage. Round and round it goes, sometimes for decades. This pattern is particularly common in intimate relationships. One partner feels criticized or rejected, experiences shame, then lashes out in rage. The other partner, hurt by the rage, withdraws or retaliates. This triggers more shame in the first partner, more rage, more retaliation. Both people end up feeling unseen, unheard, unloved. Both are drowning in shame, but it looks like anger on the surface. I want to talk about another way shame manifests that's less obvious but equally destructive: perfectionism. Now, you might not immediately connect perfectionism with shame. Perfectionists often look like they have it all together. They're high achievers, detail oriented, successful. But dig a little deeper, and you'll often find that perfectionism is actually a defense against shame. The perfectionist's unconscious logic goes something like this: if I can just be perfect, if I can just never make mistakes, then I'll be beyond criticism. I'll finally be worthy. But of course, perfection is impossible. So the perfectionist lives in constant anxiety, constantly falling short of impossible standards, constantly confirming their deep belief that they're not good enough. And here's the really cruel irony: even when perfectionists achieve something remarkable, it doesn't heal the shame. The shame just moves the goalposts. Okay, I got straight A's, but did I really understand the material? Okay, I got the promotion, but do I really deserve it? Okay, my presentation was flawless, but what about next time? Perfectionism is exhausting because it's not actually about achieving excellence, it's about avoiding shame. And since shame comes from inside, from those early wired patterns, no amount of external achievement can fix it. You can't earn your way out of shame, because shame isn't about what you do, it's about who you believe you are. Another common shame defense is what we might call the imposter syndrome. This is huge, especially among high achievers. The person might be objectively successful, respected in their field, accomplished by any measure. But inside, they're convinced they're a fraud who somehow fooled everyone. They live in terror of being found out, exposed as the inadequate person they believe themselves to be. The imposter syndrome is particularly insidious because success actually makes it worse. The more successful you become, the higher you climb, the farther you have to fall when everyone discovers you're a fraud. So, success, instead of building confidence, actually increases anxiety. Every achievement just raises the stakes. I know someone, let's call her Maria, who's a respected physician. She graduated at the top of her medical school class, completed a prestigious residency, has saved countless lives. But she lies awake at night replaying every small mistake, convinced that she's incompetent, that she's going to hurt someone, that she shouldn't be allowed to practice medicine. When colleagues compliment her work, she thinks they're just being nice or that she's fooled them. When patients thank her, she thinks about all the ways she could have done better. She works obsessively, not because she loves medicine, though she does, but because she's trying to outrun the feeling that she doesn't belong there, that she's not smart enough, not good enough, not really a real doctor. This is the prison of shame. No matter what you achieve in the external world, the internal world remains the same. You're still that collapsed toddler, still fundamentally flawed, still one mistake away from being exposed and rejected. But here's where things get really complex. Shame doesn't just live in individuals, it gets passed down through generations. Parents who carry unresolved shame often can't tolerate shame in their children. When their child shows vulnerability or makes mistakes, it triggers the parent's own shame. Unable to bear this, the parent might respond with anger, criticism, withdrawal, passing the shame on to the next generation. Think about this for a moment. A mother who was body shamed as a child grows up hating her body. She has a daughter who one day says, "Mommy, am I fat?" This triggers all of the mother's own body shame. Unable to tolerate these feelings, she might respond in ways that transmit shame. "Don't be ridiculous, you're fine," dismissing the child's feelings. Or, "Well, we could both lose a few pounds," confirming the shame. Or getting angry at the child for bringing it up, shaming the child for having feelings. The mother doesn't mean to shame her daughter. She's trying to protect her from the pain she herself experienced. But because she can't tolerate her own shame, she can't help her daughter learn to tolerate and move through normal shame experiences. The shame gets passed on, often in exactly the way the parent was trying to prevent. This intergenerational transmission of shame happens through thousands of micro interactions, most of them completely unconscious. The way a parent's face changes when certain topics come up, the slight tension in their voice when the child expresses certain emotions, the topics that are never discussed, the family secrets everyone knows but no one mentions. Children are incredibly attuned to their parents' emotional states. They pick up on shame even when it's never explicitly expressed. They learn what's shameful not through what's said, but through what's unsaid, not through what's shown, but through what's hidden. And this brings us to family systems and how shame operates at a collective level. Some families have what we might call shame based systems, where shame is the primary organizing principle. In these families, there's usually a focus on external appearance, looking good to the outside world, while denying or hiding problems within the family. There might be family secrets, addiction, mental illness, abuse, financial problems that everyone knows about but no one discusses. Children learn early that certain things must never be mentioned, certain feelings must never be expressed, certain truths must never be acknowledged. They learn to maintain the family image at all costs, even if it means denying their own reality. In shame based families, children often take on rigid roles. There's the hero child who achieves for the family, carrying the burden of making the family look good. There's the scapegoat who acts out, becoming the identified problem that allows the family to avoid looking at deeper issues. There's the lost child who disappears, becomes invisible, doesn't make waves. There's the mascot who uses humor to deflect from pain. These roles aren't chosen consciously. Children adapt to what the family system needs to maintain its equilibrium, even if that equilibrium is dysfunctional. And these roles, formed in childhood to survive the family system, often persist into adulthood, affecting all future relationships. Let me give you an example. In the Johnson family, dad is an alcoholic, but no one talks about it. Mom pretends everything is fine. The oldest child, Michael, becomes the hero, straight A's, star athlete, never causes problems. He's carrying the family's need to look good to the outside world. His sister, Sarah, becomes the scapegoat. She acts out, gets in trouble at school, draws attention away from dad's drinking by becoming the problem child. The youngest, Tommy, becomes invisible, quiet, withdrawn, never asking for anything, trying not to add to the family's stress. Fast forward 20 years. Michael is a successful executive, but he's burned out from constantly overachieving and can't tolerate any imperfection in himself. Sarah struggles with addiction herself, still playing out the role of the problem, even though she's no longer in the family system. Tommy has difficulty asserting himself in relationships, always making himself smaller, never feeling like his needs matter. All three are carrying shame from a family system that couldn't acknowledge reality. They learned that truth is dangerous, that feelings can't be trusted, that maintaining appearances is more important than authenticity. This isn't just about individual psychology, it's about how shame operates as a systemic force that shapes entire family cultures. Cultural shame adds another layer of complexity. Every culture has ideas about what's shameful and what's honorable, what should be hidden and what can be shown. These cultural shame messages intersect with family shame and individual shame in complex ways. In some cultures, independence and self reliance are valued, so needing help becomes shameful. In others, harmony and group cohesion are paramount, so standing out or asserting individual needs becomes shameful. Some cultures shame emotional expression, others shame emotional restraint, some shame sexuality, others shame prudishness. These cultural shame messages get internalized early, becoming part of how we see ourselves in the world. They're so deeply embedded that we often don't even recognize them as cultural. They just feel like truth. It takes conscious effort to recognize that what feels shameful to us might be completely acceptable in another culture, and vice versa. Gender adds yet another dimension to shame. The shame messages directed at boys and men are different from those directed at girls and women, though both can be equally destructive. Boys learn early that vulnerability is shameful, that they must be strong, independent, never showing weakness or need. The phrase, big boys don't cry, has damaged generations of men, teaching them that their emotional life is shameful and must be hidden. Girls, on the other hand, often receive shame messages about their bodies, their sexuality, their ambition. They learn that they must be pretty, but not vain, sexual, but not slutty, ambitious, but not threatening. They navigate impossible double binds where any choice risks shame. These gendered shame messages affect not just how we see ourselves, but how we relate to others. Men who've learned that vulnerability is shameful often struggle with intimacy, unable to show their partners who they really are. Women who've internalized shame about their bodies might struggle with sexuality, unable to feel comfortable in their own skin. And of course, people who don't fit neatly into gender binaries face their own unique shame challenges, often experiencing shame simply for existing as they are in a world that demands conformity to rigid categories. Now, let's talk about what happens when shame becomes truly toxic, when it moves from being an emotion we sometimes experience to being the core of our identity. Toxic shame is different from ordinary shame in several important ways. First, toxic shame is pervasive. It's not confined to specific situations or behaviors. It contaminates everything. The person doesn't just feel ashamed of something they did, they feel ashamed of everything they are. Their thoughts are wrong, their feelings are wrong, their desires are wrong, their very existence is wrong. Second, toxic shame is persistent. It doesn't pass like ordinary emotions, it's always there, like a background hum of wrongness. Even in moments of happiness or success, there's still that underlying sense of being fundamentally flawed. Third, toxic shame is self reinforcing because the person believes they're fundamentally bad, they interpret everything through that lens. Successes are flukes or frauds, failures are confirmation of what they've always known. Neutral events become evidence of their inadequacy. The shame creates the reality it expects to find. People with toxic shame often engage in what we call shame spirals. Something triggers the shame, maybe a small mistake, a perceived rejection, a memory. The shame floods in, bringing with it all the evidence of their worthlessness. They remember every failure, every rejection, every confirmation that they're not good enough. The shame builds on itself, becoming more and more intense, more and more global, until it feels like the entire truth of their existence. During a shame spiral, rational thought becomes impossible. The person might intellectually know that one mistake doesn't make them worthless, but the felt experience is of complete worthlessness. They might know that the triggering event was small, but it doesn't feel small. It feels like confirmation of everything they've always feared about themselves. Shame spirals can last hours, days, sometimes weeks. During this time, the person might isolate themselves, unable to bear being seen. They might engage in self destructive behaviors, substance abuse, self harm, risky sexual behavior, trying to escape the unbearable feeling, or to punish themselves for being so fundamentally bad. Or they might go the other direction, frantically trying to prove they're not worthless. They might work obsessively, seek constant reassurance, engage in people pleasing behaviors that leave them exhausted and resentful. But nothing really helps because the shame isn't about what they do, it's about who they are. This is where we need to talk about trauma and its relationship to shame. While not all shame is trauma related, severe trauma, especially in childhood, almost always involves profound shame. This is particularly true for interpersonal trauma, abuse, neglect, violence that happens within relationships that should be safe. When a child is abused by someone who should protect them, the child faces an impossible dilemma. They depend on this person for survival, so they can't afford to see them as bad. The only option is to see themselves as bad. This is happening because I'm bad. If I were good, they would treat me better. This is actually adaptive in the moment. By taking responsibility, the child maintains some sense of control. If it's my fault, then maybe I can fix it. Maybe if I'm very, very good, the abuse will stop. This is less terrifying than the truth that they're helpless, at the mercy of someone who's supposed to love them. But while this shame helps the child survive the trauma, it becomes a prison later. Long after the abuse has ended, they still carry the conviction that they caused it, that they deserved it, that there's something fundamentally wrong with them that made it happen. Sexual abuse creates particularly complex shame because it often involves a violation of the child's own body responses. The body might respond physiologically even when the child doesn't want what's happening. This creates a deep shame about their own body, a sense that their body betrayed them, that they can't trust their own sensations and desires. Adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse often describe feeling dirty, contaminated, fundamentally damaged. They might intellectually know the abuse wasn't their fault, but in their body, in their nervous system, they still carry the shame. They might struggle with sexuality, either avoiding it entirely or engaging in risky sexual behaviors that recreate the shame dynamics of the original trauma. Physical abuse creates its own shame patterns. Children who are hit learn that they're so bad they deserve violence. They learn that anger leads to danger, that mistakes lead to pain, that they must be constantly vigilant for signs of threat. As adults, they might find themselves in relationships that recreate these dynamics, confirming their deep belief that they deserve to be hurt. Emotional abuse and neglect can be just as damaging, though they're often harder to recognize. The child who's constantly criticized, who's told they're stupid, lazy, worthless, who's ignored when they need comfort, this child internalizes these messages as truth about who they are. As adults, they might not even recognize that they were abused. I wasn't hit, they might say. Other people had it worse. But the shame they carry is just as real, just as destructive. And here's something crucial to understand about trauma related shame: it's not just psychological, trauma literally changes the brain. Chronic stress in childhood affects the development of the hippocampus, which processes memory. It affects the amygdala, which processes threat. It affects the prefrontal cortex, which regulates emotions and behavior. Children who experience chronic shame and trauma often develop what's called a sensitized stress response system. Their amygdala becomes hyperactive, constantly scanning for threat. Their hippocampus has trouble distinguishing between past and present, so old threats feel current. Their prefrontal cortex has trouble regulating the intense emotions that get triggered. This means that healing trauma related shame isn't just about changing thoughts or beliefs, it's about literally rewiring the brain, creating new neural pathways, teaching the nervous system that it's safe now, that the danger has passed, that connection is possible without threat. This brings us to the crucial question: how do we heal shame? And I want to be really clear here, healing is possible. The brain's neuroplasticity means that the patterns laid down in childhood can be changed. It's not easy and it's not quick, but it's absolutely possible to develop what we call earned security, the ability to form secure attachments even if you didn't have them in childhood. But here's the challenge: shame makes us want to hide, but healing requires us to be seen. Shame tells us we're uniquely flawed, but healing requires recognizing our common humanity. Shame says connection is dangerous, but healing happens in relationship. Traditional talk therapy, while valuable, often isn't enough for deep shame. Remember, shame lives in the right brain, in the body, in the nervous system. Talking about shame engages the left brain, but it might not touch where shame actually lives. You can understand intellectually that you're worthy while still feeling worthless in your body. This is why effective shame treatment often involves what we call bottom up approaches, working with the body and nervous system directly rather than trying to think our way to healing. Somatic therapies, for instance, work directly with body sensations and nervous system states. Instead of talking about shame, you learn to notice it in your body, to stay present with it without being overwhelmed, to discharge the trapped energy of old shame states. Let's say someone is working with a somatic therapist on shame. They might start by just noticing what shame feels like in their body. When you think about that memory, what do you notice in your body? The client might notice their chest tightening, their shoulders collapsing, their stomach clenching. Instead of trying to change these sensations or make them go away, they learn to stay present with them, to breathe through them, to notice that sensations are just sensations. They're uncomfortable, but not dangerous. Over time, this builds what we call affect tolerance, the ability to feel feelings without being overwhelmed by them. This is crucial for shame because shame feels so intolerable that people will do almost anything to avoid it. But when you learn that you can feel shame without dying, without disappearing, without being annihilated, it starts to lose its power over you. EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is another approach that works well for shame, especially trauma related shame. EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, usually eye movements, but sometimes tapping or sounds, while the person recalls difficult memories. This seems to help the brain reprocess traumatic memories, moving them from the emotional right brain to the more integrated whole brain. Someone doing EMDR for shame might recall a shaming memory while following the therapist's finger back and forth. As they do this, the memory often starts to shift. New insights arise spontaneously. The emotional charge decreases. The person might suddenly realize at a felt level, not just intellectually, that they were just a child, that it wasn't their fault, that they did the best they could. But perhaps the most important element in healing shame is what we talked about earlier: repair. Remember, shame often develops when there's rupture without repair in early relationships. Healing happens when we experience repair, when we learn that rupture doesn't mean permanent rejection, that we can make mistakes and still be worthy of love. This is why the therapeutic relationship itself is so crucial in shame healing. A skilled therapist provides what we call a corrective emotional experience. When shame arises in therapy, and it will, the therapist doesn't reject, criticize, or abandon. They stay present, warm, accepting. They help the client learn that shame can be witnessed without judgment, that they can be seen in their shame and still be accepted. But here's the thing: this is terrifying for someone with deep shame. Being seen feels life threatening. The very thing they need for healing, genuine connection, feels like the most dangerous thing in the world. This is why shame therapy requires such skill and patience. The therapist has to create safety slowly, respecting the client's defenses while gently inviting them toward connection. Group therapy can be particularly powerful for shame because shame tells us we're uniquely flawed. In group, people discover that others share their struggles, their fears, their sense of not being enough. There's something profoundly healing about saying your most shameful secret out loud and having others say, "Me too." But it's not just formal therapy that heals shame. Any relationship where we can be truly seen and accepted helps rewire those old shame patterns. This might be with a friend, a partner, a mentor, a spiritual community. The key is that it has to be a relationship where we can show up as we really are, not just our performed, acceptable self. This is harder than it sounds because people with deep shame have usually developed elaborate strategies to hide their true selves. They might be people pleasers, always focusing on others' needs. They might be overachievers, hiding behind accomplishments. They might be jokers, using humor to deflect from vulnerability. They might be helpers, always giving but never receiving. These strategies work to keep shame at bay, but they also prevent real connection. You can't be truly known if you're always performing. You can't receive love if you're hiding who you really are. So, healing shame requires gradually, carefully lowering these defenses and risking being seen. I want to talk about self compassion here because it's become such a buzzword, but it's often misunderstood, especially in relation to shame. Self compassion isn't about telling yourself you're great or pumping yourself up with affirmations. It's about treating yourself with the same kindness you'd offer a good friend who was struggling. Kristen Neff, who's done groundbreaking research on self compassion, identifies three components. First is mindfulness, being aware of your suffering without exaggerating or minimizing it. Second is common humanity, recognizing that suffering and imperfection are part of the human experience, not evidence that you're uniquely flawed. Third is self kindness, being warm and understanding toward yourself rather than harshly critical. For people with deep shame, self compassion can feel impossible, even dangerous. They might believe that self criticism keeps them in line, that without it, they'd become lazy, selfish, bad. They might feel like they don't deserve compassion, or self compassion might trigger grief for all the years they've spent hating themselves. This is why self compassion often has to be learned gradually in small doses. It might start with just noticing self criticism without trying to change it, then maybe offering themselves the tiniest bit of understanding. This is really hard. Eventually, they might be able to offer themselves the same compassion they'd offer a friend. But here's what's really powerful about self compassion in relation to shame: it breaks the shame spiral. When shame gets triggered and that critical inner voice starts its litany of your worthlessness, self compassion offers a different response. Instead of, I'm such an idiot, I always mess everything up, I'm worthless, it might be, I'm having a really hard time right now. Everyone makes mistakes. What do I need in this moment? This isn't about making excuses or letting yourself off the hook. It's about recognizing that beating yourself up doesn't actually help. In fact, research shows that self compassion is more motivating than self criticism. When we're not paralyzed by shame, we have more energy to actually make changes, to repair harm we've caused, to grow and learn. Now, I want to address something that's often overlooked in discussions about shame: the role of the body and nervous system in healing. We've talked about how shame lives in the body, how it's a full nervous system response. This means that healing shame requires working with the body and nervous system, not just thoughts and emotions. Polyvagal theory, developed by Stephen Porges, has revolutionized our understanding of how the nervous system responds to threat and safety. According to this theory, we have three basic nervous system states. There's the ventral vagal state, which is our social engagement system, when we feel safe, connected, able to relate to others. There's the sympathetic state, which is fight or flight, mobilized, activated, ready for action. And there's the dorsal vagal state, which is shut down, collapse, playing dead. Shame typically involves a dorsal vagal response, that collapse, that wanting to disappear. But here's what's important: you can't just talk someone out of a dorsal vagal state. The nervous system has to be gently brought back online through specific interventions that signal safety to the body. This might involve breathing exercises that activate the ventral vagal system. It might involve movement that helps discharge trapped energy. It might involve safe touch that signals connection. It might involve music or rhythm that regulates the nervous system. The key is that these interventions work directly with the body, bypassing the thinking brain to speak directly to the nervous system. Let me give you a simple example. When someone is in a shame state, their breathing often becomes shallow and restricted. This sends signals to the brain that there's danger, which reinforces the shame state. By consciously taking slow, deep breaths, especially extending the exhale, we activate the ventral vagal system, signaling safety to the nervous system. This doesn't make the shame disappear, but it makes it more tolerable, more workable. Movement is another powerful tool for working with shame in the body. Shame involves a collapse, a shrinking, a making oneself small. By consciously moving in ways that are expansive, reaching the arms up, opening the chest, taking up space, we send different signals to the nervous system. This isn't about power posing or faking confidence. It's about gently inviting the body out of its collapsed state. Dance and expressive movement can be particularly healing for shame because they allow the body to tell its story without words. Someone might not be able to talk about their shame, but they can move it, express it through their body, let it flow and change and transform through movement. Yoga is another practice that many people find helpful for shame. It combines breath, movement, and mindfulness in ways that regulate the nervous system. It also involves being present with discomfort, holding a challenging pose, breathing through intensity, which builds that effect tolerance I mentioned earlier. But here's the key with any body based practice for shame: it has to be done with compassion and choice. Forcing yourself through intense exercise as punishment for your body, or doing yoga competitively, trying to be the best in class, these can actually reinforce shame. The healing comes from moving with kindness, with respect for your body's limits, with appreciation for what your body can do, rather than criticism for what it can't. Touch is another crucial element in healing shame, though it's also complex. Safe, appropriate touch signals connection and acceptance to the nervous system in ways that words never can. A hand on the shoulder, a hug, even sitting close to someone can help regulate a shame state. But for people who've experienced boundary violations, touch can also be triggering. It has to be negotiated carefully, with full consent and control. Some therapies specifically incorporate touch. Somatic experiencing practitioners might gently place a hand on a client's shoulder or back, helping them feel supported and grounded. Hakomi therapists use what they call nourishing contact to help clients experience safety in their bodies. But touch in therapy requires extensive training and clear boundaries to be safe and healing rather than re traumatizing. For many people, working with animals can provide a bridge to healing touch. A dog doesn't judge your shame. A horse doesn't care about your accomplishments or failures. They respond to your authentic emotional state, providing immediate, honest feedback that can be profoundly healing. Equine therapy, in particular, has shown remarkable results for trauma and shame because horses are so attuned to human emotional states, and because working with such large, powerful animals requires presence and authenticity. Nature itself can be healing for shame. There's something about being in natural settings that helps regulate the nervous system and provides perspective. The tree doesn't care if you made a mistake at work. The ocean doesn't judge your body. The mountains remind you of something larger than your individual struggles. Forest bathing, a practice from Japan called Shinrin Yoku, involves simply being in nature, taking it in through all your senses. Research shows it lowers cortisol, reduces blood pressure, and activates the parasympathetic nervous system in a healthy way, not the dorsal vagal collapse of shame, but the ventral vagal state of calm presence. Creative expression is another powerful avenue for healing shame. Shame often involves stories we tell ourselves about who we are, stories that got written before we had words. Through creative expression, art, music, writing, drama, we can rewrite these stories, literally creating new narratives about ourselves and our lives. Someone might paint their shame, giving it color and form, externalizing what's been trapped inside. They might write poetry that expresses what can't be said in prose. They might create music that captures the feeling of shame and then transforms it into something else. The creative process itself is an assertion of agency. I can make something. I can transform raw material into something new. This directly contradicts shame's message that you're powerless, worthless, unable to contribute anything of value. But here's what's crucial about creative expression for shame: it has to be about process, not product. If you're painting to create a masterpiece, writing to get published, making music to impress others, you're still in the performance trap that maintains shame. The healing comes from creating for its own sake, for the joy or release or expression of it, regardless of the outcome. Play is another often overlooked element in healing shame. Shame is serious, it's heavy, it contracts us, makes us small and tight. Play does the opposite. It expands us, lightens us, connects us with joy and spontaneity. But for many people with deep shame, play feels dangerous or impossible. They might feel they don't deserve to play, or that play is frivolous, or that they'll be judged for being childish. Learning to play again, whether it's playing games, being silly, engaging in sports or hobbies just for fun, is part of reclaiming the parts of ourselves that shame buried. It's saying, I deserve joy. I deserve lightness. I deserve to do things just because they're fun, not because they're productive or impressive. Now, let's talk about something that's crucial but often uncomfortable: how shame shows up in therapy itself. For someone with deep shame, the therapy relationship can trigger all their shame dynamics. They might feel ashamed of needing help, ashamed of their struggles, ashamed of taking up the therapist's time. They might constantly apologize, minimize their problems, or try to be the good client who doesn't cause trouble. They might also feel ashamed of their feelings toward the therapist. If they feel attached, they might shame themselves for being needy. If they feel angry, they might shame themselves for being ungrateful. If they feel attracted, they might shame themselves for being inappropriate. All of these feelings are normal and important to work with, but shame makes them feel dangerous and wrong. A skilled therapist knows how to work with these shame dynamics in the relationship. They might name what's happening. I notice you're apologizing a lot. I wonder if you're feeling like you're taking up too much space here. They might normalize the client's feelings. Of course, you feel attached to me. That's how therapy works through relationship. They might share their own experience. I'm not feeling burdened by you at all. In fact, I feel privileged that you're trusting me with this. But here's the thing: for someone with deep shame, even these interventions can trigger more shame. They might feel ashamed that their shame is so obvious, ashamed that they need reassurance, ashamed that they can't just be normal. This is why shame work requires such patience. Layer by layer, slowly and gently, the shame is witnessed, accepted, integrated. Ruptures in the therapy relationship, when handled well, can be particularly healing. The therapist forgets an important detail, misunderstands something, says something that lands wrong. For someone with shame, this might feel catastrophic, proof that they're too much, too difficult, that they've ruined the relationship. But when the therapist acknowledges the rupture, takes responsibility for their part, and works to repair it, I can see that what I said didn't land well. Can you help me understand what you heard so I can understand better? Something profound happens. The client learns that rupture doesn't mean ending, that relationships can withstand imperfection, that repair is possible. This is why the match between therapist and client is so important for shame work. The therapist needs to be able to tolerate their own shame, to acknowledge their mistakes without defensiveness, to stay present even when things get messy. A therapist who needs to be seen as perfect, who can't tolerate their own vulnerability, won't be able to hold space for the client's shame. I want to talk about medication for a moment because it's often part of the picture for people dealing with severe shame, especially when it's accompanied by depression or anxiety. Medication doesn't cure shame. There's no pill that makes you feel worthy. but medication can sometimes help regulate the nervous system enough that the person can engage in the therapeutic work. Someone in a severe depression might be so shut down, so deep in dorsal vagal collapse, that they literally can't engage in therapy. Antidepressants might help bring their nervous system back online enough that they can start to work with their feelings. Someone with severe anxiety might be so hypervigilant, so locked in sympathetic activation, that they can't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. Anti anxiety medication might help calm their system enough that they can risk connection. But medication is complex with shame because taking medication can itself become a source of shame. People might feel ashamed that they can't handle their problems on their own, that they need chemical help, that they're weak or broken. This shame about medication can prevent people from getting help that might actually allow them to do the deeper healing work. Cultural messages about medication add another layer. Some cultures see taking psychiatric medication as shameful, as evidence of weakness or failure. Other cultures might push medication as the only solution, shaming people who want to try other approaches. Finding what works for each individual without shame or judgment is part of the healing process. Let's talk about shame in relationships, because this is where shame often plays out most painfully. Intimate relationships require vulnerability, and vulnerability is exactly what shame makes feel dangerous. The closer someone gets, the more likely they are to see who you really are. And if you believe you're fundamentally flawed, that prospect is terrifying. People with deep shame might avoid relationships altogether, deciding it's safer to be alone than to risk rejection. Or they might engage in relationships but never really let themselves be seen, maintaining a careful performance of who they think they should be. Or they might choose relationships that confirm their shame, partners who criticize, reject, or abuse them, confirming their belief that they're unworthy of real love. Even in healthy relationships, shame creates challenges. Every conflict becomes evidence that you're bad. Every mistake becomes catastrophic. Every need becomes proof that you're too much. The partner's bad mood must be your fault. Their attraction to anyone else means you're not enough. Their need for space means you're unlovable. The partner of someone with deep shame often feels confused and helpless. They might offer constant reassurance, but it never seems to stick. They might walk on eggshells, trying not to trigger their partner's shame. They might feel shut out, unable to really connect. They might even start to feel ashamed themselves, wondering what's wrong with them that they can't help their partner feel better. This is where couples therapy can be crucial. A skilled couples therapist can help both partners understand the shame dynamics in their relationship. They can help the shame prone partner recognize how shame distorts their perceptions and reactions. They can help the other partner understand that they can't fix their partner's shame, but they can be a supportive presence in the healing. Emotionally focused therapy, developed by Sue Johnson, is particularly effective for working with shame in couples. It helps partners recognize their attachment patterns and emotional cycles. The couple learns to recognize when shame gets triggered, how it affects their interaction, and how to respond differently. For instance, a couple might recognize this pattern. When partner A feels criticized, even slightly, they experience shame and withdraw. Partner B experiences this withdrawal as rejection and pursues, trying to reconnect. This pursuit feels like more criticism to partner A, who withdraws further. Partner B feels more rejected and pursues harder. Round and round they go, both desperate for connection, but inadvertently pushing each other away. Once they recognize this pattern, they can start to interrupt it. Partner A might say, "I'm feeling shame right now and I need a minute, but I'm not leaving you." Partner B might say, "I'm feeling scared that you're pulling away, but I know this isn't about me." They learn to name what's happening, to separate shame from reality, to reach for each other even when it's hard. Sexual shame deserves special attention because it's so common and so rarely discussed. We live in a culture with profoundly mixed messages about sexuality. We're bombarded with sexual images while being told that sexual desire is shameful. We're told sex should be natural and easy while receiving no real education about it. We're expected to be sexually confident while being shamed for our bodies, our desires, our inexperience, or our experience. For people who've experienced sexual trauma, sexual shame can be particularly complex. They might feel ashamed of what happened to them, even though it wasn't their fault. They might feel ashamed of their body's responses during the trauma. They might feel ashamed of having sexual feelings after trauma, or ashamed of not having them. Even without trauma, many people carry sexual shame. They might feel ashamed of their bodies, convinced they're too fat, too thin, too hairy, too bald, too something to be desirable. They might feel ashamed of their desires, believing they want too much sex or too little, that their fantasies are wrong, that their preferences are shameful. This shame profoundly affects intimate relationships. Someone might avoid sex altogether because the vulnerability feels too dangerous. Or they might engage in sex but never really be present, disconnected from their body and their partner. Or they might use sex compulsively, trying to prove they're desirable while never really believing it. Healing sexual shame requires incredible gentleness and patience. It might involve sex therapy, where couples learn to communicate about sex, to express needs and boundaries, to be present with each other without performance pressure. It might involve individual therapy to address trauma or body image issues. It might involve somatic work to help people reconnect with their bodies in safe, non sexual ways first. The Me Too movement has brought important attention to sexual violence and harassment, but it's also surfaced complex shame dynamics. Survivors who speak up often face shame for not speaking up sooner, for allowing it to happen, for making a big deal out of it. Those who don't speak up might feel ashamed of their silence. Those who are accused might feel shame, whether guilty or innocent. These cultural conversations about consent, power, and sexuality are crucial, but they also stir up deep shame for many people. Let's talk about shame and parenting, because this is where the intergenerational cycle either continues or gets interrupted. Parents who carry unresolved shame often desperately want to spare their children the same pain, but because they haven't healed their own shame, they might inadvertently pass it on. A mother who was shamed for her emotions as a child might shame her daughter's anger while trying to validate her sadness. A father who was shamed for showing weakness might push his son to be tough, even while consciously believing boys should be allowed to cry. Parents might shame behaviors in their children that remind them of parts of themselves they've rejected. Or parents might go to the opposite extreme, so afraid of shaming their children that they provide no boundaries or guidance. The child grows up without learning that some behaviors are harmful, that actions have consequences, that considering others' feelings matters. This might look like the absence of shame, but it often creates its own shame later when the child struggles to function in relationships and society. Conscious parenting involves recognizing our own shame triggers and working to heal them so we don't unconsciously pass them on. It involves learning the difference between shame and appropriate guilt, between humiliation and teaching. It involves repairing when we mess up because we will mess up. When a parent loses their temper and says something shaming, the repair is crucial. I'm sorry I yelled at you. I was frustrated, but that's not your fault. You're not bad. I love you even when I'm upset. This teaches the child that ruptures can be repaired, that they can make mistakes without losing love, that emotions can be intense without being dangerous. But here's the thing, parents can't do this if they're drowning in their own shame. A parent who feels like a failure, who believes they're damaging their children, who compares themselves constantly to other parents. This parent is operating from shame, and it affects everything they do. This is why parent support is so crucial. Parents need spaces where they can be honest about their struggles without judgment, where they can admit they don't know what they're doing, where they can share their fears and failures, and find out they're not alone. Parenting from a place of self compassion rather than shame makes all the difference. Now, I want to address something that doesn't get talked about enough: shame and privilege. Those of us with privilege, whether it's white privilege, class privilege, able bodied privilege, or any other form, often carry shame about it. We might feel guilty for having advantages others don't have. We might feel ashamed when our privilege is pointed out. We might deny our privilege because acknowledging it triggers shame. But shame about privilege doesn't help anyone. It centers our feelings rather than others' experiences. It paralyzes us rather than motivating action. It makes conversations about inequality about our comfort rather than about justice. Working with privilege shame involves recognizing that privilege isn't personal. You didn't individually create systems of inequality. It involves taking responsibility for how you benefit from and potentially perpetuate these systems without taking it as a personal attack on your character. It involves using privilege to challenge inequality rather than hiding in shame about it. On the flip side, those experiencing oppression often internalize shame about their marginalized identities. A person of color might internalize racist messages about their worth. A person with disabilities might internalize ableist assumptions about their value. LGBTQ plus individuals might internalize homophobic or transphobic shame messages. This internalized oppression is particularly insidious because it makes people blame themselves for systemic problems. They might feel ashamed of not being able to succeed in systems designed to exclude them. They might feel ashamed of needing accommodations, support, or advocacy. They might feel ashamed of their anger about injustice. Healing internalized oppression involves recognizing that the shame doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the systems that create and maintain inequality. It involves finding community with others who share your experiences, who can mirror back your worth and dignity. It involves righteous anger, recognizing that anger about injustice is appropriate, not shameful. Let me talk about shame and addiction because they're so intimately connected that some people call addiction a shame based disease. The cycle goes like this: shame feels unbearable, so the person uses substances or behaviors to escape it. The use provides temporary relief, but then creates more shame about using, about consequences of use, about inability to stop. This new shame feels unbearable, so the person uses again. Round and round it goes. But it's not just that shame leads to addiction. The addiction itself becomes a source of profound shame. The lies, the broken promises, the damage to relationships, the loss of control, all of this confirms the person's belief that they're fundamentally bad. They're not just someone who drinks too much, they're a worthless drunk. They're not just someone struggling with drug use, they're a junkie who destroys everything they touch. This is why shame based approaches to addiction, trying to shame people into sobriety, not only don't work, but often make things worse. Telling someone they should be ashamed of their behavior when shame is what drives the behavior in the first place is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. Effective addiction treatment addresses the underlying shame. This might involve trauma therapy to address the original sources of shame. It might involve group support where people can share their experiences without judgment. It might involve learning new ways to cope with difficult emotions without substances. The 12-step programs, for all their controversies, offer something powerful for shame: a community of people who understand, who've been there, who don't judge because they know what it's like. The process of sharing your story, of admitting powerlessness, of making amends when done in a supportive community, this can be profoundly healing for shame. But the 12 steps can also trigger shame if not handled carefully. The emphasis on character defects and moral inventory can reinforce shame for some people. The religious language can trigger shame for those who've experienced religious trauma. The emphasis on powerlessness can trigger shame for those who need to reclaim their power. This is why there's no one-size-fits-all approach to healing addiction and shame. Some people find healing in 12-step programs, others find it in smart recovery or other alternatives. Some need intensive therapy, others find healing through connection, creativity, service, spirituality. The key is addressing both the addiction and the underlying shame, recognizing that they're intimately connected. Food and body shame deserve special attention because they affect so many people, especially but not exclusively women. We live in a culture obsessed with thinness while surrounded by processed food designed to be addictive. We're told our worth depends on our appearance while being presented with impossible, digitally altered standards of beauty. For someone with an eating disorder, food and body become the battleground where shame plays out. Restriction might be an attempt to control shame, to perfect the body so the self becomes acceptable. Binging might be an attempt to numb shame, to fill the emptiness shame creates. Purging might be an attempt to literally expel the shame, to get rid of the bad feelings. But the eating disorder creates more shame. Shame about eating or not eating, shame about the body no matter what it looks like, shame about being obsessed with food and weight, shame about the lying, the secrecy, the rituals, the very behaviors meant to manage shame become new sources of it. Healing from food and body shame involves challenging cultural messages about worth and appearance. It involves learning to see the body as more than an ornament to be perfected, recognizing it as the vehicle through which we experience life. It involves intuitive eating, learning to trust the body's signals rather than external rules about what and when to eat. But perhaps most importantly, it involves recognizing that the problem was never really about food or body. These were just the stage where deeper shame played out. Healing involves addressing that deeper shame, the core belief of not being enough that no amount of weight loss or muscle gain could ever fix. I want to spend some time on what resilience looks like when it comes to shame, because the goal isn't to never feel shame. That's neither possible nor desirable. Appropriate shame, like appropriate guilt, serves important social functions. It helps us recognize when we've violated social norms or hurt others. It motivates repair and behavior change. Shame resilience is the ability to experience shame without being overwhelmed by it, to move through it rather than getting stuck in it. People with shame resilience can recognize shame when it arises, name it, feel it, and then let it pass. They can distinguish between appropriate shame about actions and toxic shame about self. Brene Brown, who's done groundbreaking research on shame and vulnerability, identifies 4 elements of shame resilience. First is recognizing shame and understanding its triggers, knowing what situations, relationships, or experiences tend to trigger shame for you. Second is practicing critical awareness, reality checking the messages shame tells you. Third is reaching out, sharing your experience with trusted others rather than isolating. And fourth is speaking shame, literally naming it out loud, which reduces its power. When you can say, I'm feeling shame about this, you're already moving toward resilience. But developing shame resilience isn't a linear process. It's not like you work on it and then you're done. It's an ongoing practice, something you cultivate over time. And some days are harder than others. Stress, illness, loss, trauma, these can all make us more vulnerable to shame, even when we've done a lot of healing work. This is why having a shame resilience practice is important. This might include regular therapy or support groups. It might include mindfulness practices that help you notice shame when it arises. It might include creative expression, movement, time in nature, whatever helps you stay connected to your worth and dignity. Community is crucial for shame resilience. We need people who can remind us who we are when shame tells us we're worthless. We need people who can witness our struggles without judgment. We need people who can share their own shame stories, reminding us we're not alone. But finding this community can be challenging, especially for people with deep shame who've learned to isolate. It might start with just one person, a therapist, a friend, a support group member who feels safe enough. Over time, as we practice vulnerability in small doses and experience acceptance rather than rejection, we can slowly expand our circle of connection. Online communities can be particularly valuable for people dealing with specific types of shame. There are communities for survivors of various traumas, for people with mental illness, for those in recovery, for people exploring sexuality and gender, for those dealing with chronic illness or disability, Finding others who share your specific struggles can be profoundly validating, but online spaces can also be shame triggering. Social media, with its curated presentations of perfect lives, can intensify shame about our own messy realities. Comment sections can become venues for shaming and humiliation. The anonymity that allows people to share vulnerabilities also allows others to attack without consequence. This is why boundaries are so important in shame healing. Learning what spaces feel safe and supportive versus those that trigger shame. Learning who deserves to hear your story and who doesn't. Learning when to share and when to protect yourself. Boundaries aren't walls, they're the gates that allow us to choose when and how to connect. I want to address professional shame, the shame that many of us carry about our work, our careers, our professional identities. In a culture that often equates worth with productivity and success with value, professional shame is rampant. People feel ashamed of not achieving enough, of not knowing enough, of not being expert enough. Imposter syndrome, which I mentioned earlier, is huge in professional settings. The higher people climb professionally, the more convinced they become that they don't belong there, that they're frauds about to be exposed. This is especially true for people from marginalized groups who are underrepresented in their fields. Professional shame can manifest as workaholism, trying to outrun shame through constant achievement. It can manifest as perfectionism, trying to be beyond criticism. It can manifest as procrastination, being so paralyzed by fear of not being good enough that you can't start. It can manifest as playing small, not pursuing opportunities because you're convinced you don't deserve them. The pandemic has added new dimensions to professional shame. People working from home feel ashamed that they're not as productive. People who lost jobs feel ashamed of unemployment. Essential workers feel ashamed of their fear. Parents trying to work while homeschooling feel ashamed of not doing either well. Healing professional shame involves recognizing that your worth isn't determined by your productivity, your job title, your salary, or your achievements. It involves finding meaning and purpose beyond external validation. It involves recognizing that everyone struggles, everyone doubts themselves, everyone makes mistakes. These are signs of being human, not of being inadequate. Let me talk about spiritual shame because for many people, their relationship with spirituality or religion is deeply affected by shame. Some religions explicitly use shame as a tool for control, teaching that human nature is fundamentally sinful, that desires are shameful, that doubt is weakness. People might carry shame about their sexuality, their bodies, their thoughts, their very existence based on religious teachings. They might feel ashamed for questioning beliefs, for not having enough faith, for not being good enough for God's love. Even after leaving shame based religious environments, these messages can persist for years or decades. But spirituality can also be a powerful resource for healing shame. Many spiritual traditions emphasize inherent worth, divine love, interconnection, forgiveness. Practices like meditation, prayer, ritual, and community worship can help regulate the nervous system and provide experiences of transcendence that contradict shame's small, contracted worldview. The key is finding spiritual approaches that affirm rather than shame, that embrace human complexity rather than demanding perfection, that offer grace rather than judgment. This might mean finding progressive communities within traditional religions, exploring new spiritual paths, or creating your own eclectic practice. For some people, nature based spirituality provides healing from shame. The natural world doesn't judge or evaluate. The cycles of growth, death, and renewal remind us that imperfection and impermanence are natural. The vastness of the cosmos can provide perspective on our individual struggles. As we near the end of our exploration, I want to emphasize something crucial. Healing shame is not about becoming shameless. Shamelessness, the inability or refusal to feel appropriate shame, is its own problem. People who are truly shameless, who feel no remorse for harm they cause, who have no regard for others' feelings, these people leave destruction in their wake. Healthy shame, like healthy guilt, serves important functions. It helps us recognize when we've violated our own values or harmed others. It motivates us to repair relationships, to grow, to do better. The key is that healthy shame is about actions, not identity, and it passes once we've made appropriate amends. The goal is integration, being able to experience the full range of human emotions, including shame, without being controlled by them. It's about developing what we might call emotional flexibility, the ability to feel what we feel, learn what we need to learn, and then move on. This integration involves grieving. As we heal from toxic shame, we often need to grieve for all the years we spent hating ourselves, all the opportunities we missed because we felt unworthy, all the relationships that were distorted by shame. This grief is important. It honors what was lost and makes space for something new. But there's also joy in shame healing, the joy of discovering who you are beneath the shame, the joy of genuine connection, the joy of taking risks, making mistakes, being imperfect, and finding that you're still lovable. The joy of living as yourself rather than as who you think you should be. People often ask how long shame healing takes, and the truth is, it's different for everyone. Some people experience significant shifts relatively quickly. Others work on shame for years. And for most of us, it's an ongoing process. We heal one layer and discover another. We make progress and then hit a setback. We think we're done and then something triggers old shame. This isn't failure, it's the nature of healing. Shame patterns that took years to develop don't disappear overnight. Neural pathways that were carved in childhood take time to rewire, and life keeps presenting us with new challenges, new opportunities to practice shame resilience. What changes over time is not that shame never arises, but how we relate to it when it does. Instead of being consumed by shame for days or weeks, maybe it lasts hours. Instead of believing everything shame tells us, we question its messages. Instead of isolating, we reach out. Instead of getting stuck, we move through. And perhaps most importantly, we develop self compassion for the ongoing journey. We recognize that healing isn't a destination, but a process. We appreciate the courage it takes to face shame, to be vulnerable, to keep showing up even when it's hard. We celebrate small victories, the moment we catch ourselves in negative self talk and choose something kinder, the time we ask for help instead of struggling alone, the day we look in the mirror and don't hate what we see. As we conclude, I want to speak directly to anyone listening who recognizes themselves in what we've discussed. If you're carrying shame, whether from childhood trauma, recent experiences, or the accumulated weight of living in a shaming world, I want you to know that you're not alone. The very fact that you've listened to this entire exploration shows courage and a desire for something different. Your shame is not your truth. It's a pattern that developed for reasons that made sense at the time, in circumstances you didn't choose, with the resources you had available. It protected you in some way, even as it limited you. And now, if you choose, you can begin to heal it. This healing won't be linear. There will be good days and bad days. There will be moments of breakthrough and moments of feeling stuck. There will be times when you feel brave and times when you want to hide. All of this is part of the process. Start wherever you are. Maybe that means finding a therapist who understands shame. Maybe it means joining a support group. Maybe it means starting a mindfulness practice or creative expression. Maybe it means simply being a little kinder to yourself today than you were yesterday. Remember that healing happens in relationship. Shame thrives in isolation, but can't survive being witnessed with compassion. Find your people, the ones who can see you in your imperfection and remind you of your inherent worth. And if you don't have those people yet, start with a professional who can hold that space while you learn to trust. Finally, remember that your shame story doesn't have to be your only story. You are more than your worst moments, more than your struggles, more than the messages shame tells you. You have inherent worth that no mistake can diminish, no failure can erase, no judgment can destroy. The journey from shame to self compassion, from hiding to authenticity, from isolation to connection, it's not easy, but it's possible. Thousands of people have walked this path before you. You don't have to walk it alone. And on the other side of shame, there's freedom, the freedom to be yourself, to make mistakes, to be human, to be whole. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into understanding shame. May you find the healing, connection, and self compassion you deserve. May you discover that underneath the shame you've carried, there's a self worthy of love, belonging, and joy. And may you have the courage to let that self be seen in all its beautiful, imperfect humanity.